What if the most terrifying thing a philosopher could tell you is not that life is meaningless, but that you are entirely responsible for the meaning you give it? Jean-Paul Sartre did not offer comfort. He offered a mirror, and what it reflected was the full weight of human freedom. Tonight, I'm here with Rowan Hotsteel.
Good evening, Clara.
The question at the center of this episode is one that Sartre placed at the center of an entire century. If no one has defined who you are supposed to be, then who are you? And what are you doing with that freedom? Tonight, we turn to Sartre and to existentialism, a philosophy that emerged from the ruins of certainty and demanded that every person answer for themselves. We ask what it means to be condemned, to be free, and whether most of us are spending our lives running from the answer.
Sartre's philosophy is not a system built in isolation. It is a response to a specific historical moment, to a Europe in which 2 world wars had dissolved the structures, the institutions, and the beliefs that people had relied on to tell them what their lives meant.
We are speaking about Jean-Paul Sartre and the philosophy of existentialism.
A philosophy that does not console, it confronts, and its central claim is one of the most radical ideas in the history of Western thought, that you are not born with a nature, a purpose, or a predetermined self. You are born into existence first, and you create yourself entirely through what you choose.
Then let us begin with the world that made Sartre necessary.
Jean-Paul Sartre was born in Paris in 1905. He came of age in France, still recovering from the losses of the First World War, and he reached intellectual maturity in the 1930s, as fascism advanced across Europe, and the certainties of liberal civilization began to collapse a second time. The traditional anchors of meaning, religion, national identity, social class, the belief in progress had been weakened by the scale of industrialized violence. For many European intellectuals of Sartre's generation, the question was no longer how to build on inherited certainties, but how to think at all in their absence.
So, historical condition was one of exposure, of having the familiar frameworks removed.
Exact. And Sartre's response was not to rebuild those frameworks, but to insist that the exposure itself was the truth. The absence of a given purpose is not a problem to be solved. It is the fundamental condition of human existence, and the task of philosophy is to face it clearly rather than disguise it. His philosophical development drew on the German phenomenological tradition, particularly the work of Edmund Husserl and Martin Heidegger, both of whom Sartre studied during a year in Berlin in 1933-1934. But where Heidegger remained in the register of abstract ontology, Sartre insisted on bringing the analysis back to the concrete human individual, and to the question of how that individual lives.
So Sartre took a philosophical tradition and made it personal, made it urgent.
Yes, and the concept that became the center of his thought is captured in a single phrase: existence precedes essence. For Sartre, traditional philosophy and religion had assumed the reverse, that things, and especially human beings, have an essence, a nature or purpose, that precedes and determines their existence. A knife has an essence before it exists. The craftsman conceives of its purpose, its form, its function, and then makes it. For centuries, theologians argued that human beings were created in the same way, with a nature defined by God, a purpose built into the design. Even secular philosophers often retained this structure, replacing divine design with human nature, reason, or social function.
So, the assumption had always been that there is something we are supposed to be.
Yes, and Sartre's rejection of this is total. There is no God who designed us. There is no fixed human nature. There is no predetermined purpose waiting to be discovered. A human being simply appears in the world without instruction, without specification, and must then decide through action what it will be. This is what existence precedes essence means in practice. You do not have a self that you then express through your choices. You are the accumulation of your choices. The self is not discovered, it is made, and it is made continuously, through every decision, however small.
So there's no core self to fall back on, no authentic inner nature waiting to be uncovered.
Exactly. And this is where the idea becomes genuinely unsettling, not merely interest. If there is no given self, then you cannot explain your failures, your cruelties, or your passivity by pointing to your nature. You cannot say. This leads to what Sartre considers the defining condition of human existence: freedom. Not freedom as a political concept, not freedom as the absence of external constraint, but freedom as an ontological fact. Human beings are, by their nature, beings who must choose. They cannot not choose. Even remaining still, even refusing to decide, is a decision with consequences for which you are responsible.
So freedom is not a gift, it is a condition you cannot escape.
Yes, we were thrown into existence already bearing this weight, and we cannot set it down. Every moment of a conscious life is a moment in which a choice is being made, whether acknowledged or not. The philosophical implications of this are severe. If I am always choosing, and if my choices define who I am, then I cannot distribute responsibility for my life across fate, circumstance, my parents, my society, or I am the author of my own existence in a way that no previous philosophical tradition had stated so starkly.
So the full force of this idea is that there's no one else to blame.
That is one way to put it. Sartre himself would say, there is no one else to be responsible. It is not a matter of blame in the punitive sense. It is a matter of authorship. You are writing your life with every choice you make. The question is whether you are willing to acknowledge that you are holding the pen. Most people, Sartre argues, are not willing to acknowledge it. And this leads to the concept that is in many ways the most psychologically penetrating in his entire philosophy. Bad faith, or in French, mauvaise foi.
So bad faith is the way we hide from freedom.
Yes, bad faith is the act of lying to oneself in order to avoid confronting the full weight of one's freedom. Sartre distinguishes two primary forms. In the first, a person pretends to be a fixed thing, a role, a function, a type, in order to deny that they are free to be otherwise. He offers the example of a waiter who performs his role so completely, with such precision and such studied gestures, that he seems to be constituted by his function. He acts as if being a waiter is what he is, as if it exhausts his identity, as if he could not be otherwise. But he could be otherwise. He is choosing, moment by moment, to enact this role. The performance is an escape from the recognition of that choice.
So, the role becomes a kind of refuge from freedom.
Exactly. And this extends far beyond professional roles. People do the same thing with social identities, with political affiliation, with the phrase "I am just this kind of person," or "I cannot help it, that is just how I am." These are all, in Sartre's analysis, forms of bad faith. They convert the ongoing open project of a human life into a fixed object, in order to be relieved of the responsibility of continuously choosing it. The second form of bad faith runs in the opposite direction. Rather than pretending to be a fixed thing, a person pretends to be pure freedom, pure possibility, with no facticity, no situation. This is the illusion of radical detachment, the belief that I am above my circumstances, that nothing binds me, that my past means nothing.
So both forms are evasions, one of freedom, one of reality.
Yes, authentic existence, for Sartre, requires holding both in view simultaneously. I am situated. I have a past. I have a body. I exist in a specific historical and social context, and I am free within and through that situation. I cannot pretend the situation does not exist, but I also cannot pretend it determines me. I am always inescapably the one who responds. But here is where it shifts from individual psychology to something even more demanding. Sartre argues that because I am always choosing, and because my choices implicitly propose a certain conception of what a human being should do, I am not only responsible for myself. Every choice I make is, in a sense, a statement about what I believe human beings ought to choose in similar situations.
So freedom extends beyond the self. It carries a kind of universal weight.
Yes, Sartre writes that when I choose for all of humanity. This is not a claim about political representation. It is a claim about the logic of choice itself. If I choose cowardice, I am implicitly saying that cowardice is an acceptable human response to difficulty. If I choose engagement, I am saying that engagement is what a human being does when faced with injustice. Every choice carries a moral proposal, whether or not the person making it acknowledges this.
So the anxiety Sartre describes is not simply personal, it is ethical.
Yes, Sartre uses the word anguish to describe the experience of recognizing this. It is the recognition that there is no authority above me to tell me what is right, and that I must choose anyway, and that in choosing I implicitly legislate for everyone. This is why Sartre's philosophy was not merely read in academic circles, but felt as a provocation by an entire generation. In post-war France, in occupied cafés and ruined cities, the question of what one does when no authority can tell you what is right was not abstract. It was the immediate practical question of whether to collaborate, to resist, to remain silent, or to speak.
And Sartre himself had to face that question directly.
Yes. During the German occupation of France, Sartre was living and working in Paris. His response to the occupation was initially limited, but he became increasingly involved in resistance activities as the war He helped found an underground intellectual resistance group, contributed to clandestine publications, and used his public position as a writer to maintain a space of critical thought under censorship. His major philosophical work, Being and Nothingness, was completed and published in 1943, while France was under occupation. The book is in some sense an act of resistance itself, an insistence on the radical freedom of consciousness, at a moment when human beings were being treated as objects to be managed, classified and destroyed.
So, the philosophy was written inside the very historical conditions it was responding to.
Yes. And Sartre's personal life was also, deliberately and controversially, an attempt to live out his ideas. His relationship with the philosopher Simone de Beauvoir is one of the most discussed intellectual partnerships of the 20th century. They met as students and remained together in their own terms until the end of Sartre's life. Their arrangement was explicitly unconventional. They rejected legal marriage, rejected sexual exclusivity, and rejected the domestic structure of the traditional bourgeois couple. They had other relationships, they disclosed these to each other, and they maintained their philosophical collaboration as the center of their shared life, described their relationship as essential, and their other relationships as contingent.
So they were attempting to design a relationship that did not rely on convention as its justification.
That was the stated intention. In existentialist terms, to rely on convention is a form of bad faith. If you stay in a relationship because leaving would violate social expectation, or because you have always been together, rather than because you are choosing to be together now, you are hiding behind a structure rather than owning your choice. The actual lived experience of this arrangement was more complicated, and de Beauvoir's own writings document considerable pain alongside the intellectual partnership. The gap between the idea of a freely chosen relationship and the emotional reality of living one is something Sartre's philosophy perhaps did not address with sufficient care for the people involved.
So his life illustrates both the ambition of his ideas and their limits when they meet actual human experience.
Yes, and Sartre himself never claimed to have solved the problem he identified. He claimed to have stated it honestly. In 1964, he was awarded the Nobel Prize in Literature. His explanation was that a writer who allows themselves to be turned into an institution compromises their independence. An institutional Sartre would carry the weight of a label, a category, a fixed identity that could then be invoked or dismissed.
So refusing the prize was itself an act against bad faith, a refusal to be fixed.
Exactly. Whether one agrees with the reasoning or not, the refusal was consistent with the philosophy. A Nobel Prize is a form of social recognition that grants a kind of essence. It defines what you are and what your work means. For Sartre, accepting that definition would have been a betrayal of the very ideas the prize was supposedly honoring.
Before we close tonight, let us take a brief pause and welcome Margaret Evernight. Margaret, for those who want to go deeper into Sartre's thought and engage directly with the ideas we have been discussing tonight, where would you invite them to continue?
Thank you, Clara. In this case, the most direct path is also the most important one. I would suggest beginning with Being and Nothingness by Jean-Paul Sartre himself.
So this is the primary source, the work in which Sartre builds the entire framework.
It is. Being and Nothingness is Sartre's most influential philosophical work, exploring consciousness, freedom, and the nature of existence. It is where he develops the full analysis of bad faith, of the for itself and the in itself, and of the relationship between human freedom and the way of the world. It is the foundation on which all subsequent existentialist thought was built.
And is this a text that a motivated but non-specialist reader can approach?
It is demanding. Sartre writes with great precision and assumes familiarity with the phenomenological tradition. A reader approaching it for the first time may benefit from reading a shorter introductory text first, such as his lecture Existentialism is a Humanism, which covers the core ideas in a more accessible form. But Being and Nothingness rewards the arguments are rigorous and the examples are drawn from everyday experience in a way that makes the abstractions feel immediately relevant.
So reading it gives you not only the ideas, but the full force of how Sartre constructed them.
Yeah, and once you have read it, you will find it very difficult to use the phrase "I had no choice" without pausing to ask whether that is actually true.
Thank you, Margaret. That is a thoughtful place to pause tonight.
Thank you, Clara. It was a pleasure.
The legacy of Sartre's existentialism is large, uneven, and still contested. In the immediate post-war period, existentialism became a cultural phenomenon as much as a philosophical school. Sartre's ideas spread far beyond academic philosophy into literature, theatre, political thought and popular culture. His plays, particularly No Exit and The Flies, explored existentialist themes in dramatic form and reached audiences who would never read Being and Nothingness. No Exit gave the world one of the most quoted lines in modern drama. Hell is other people. The line is often repeated without its context, which is unfortunate, because Sartre's point is not that other people are unpleasant, but that in the presence of others we are always seen, always judged, always potentially reduced to a fixed object in someone else's gaze.
So the problem with other people, for Sartre, is that they threaten our freedom by fixing us.
Yes, the look of the other, what Sartre calls the gaze, is the experience of suddenly being seen as a thing rather than a consciousness. When someone catches you doing something embarrassing, the immediate sensation is not shame about the act itself, but the sudden awareness that you are now an object in another person's world, fixed, categorized, defined, from outside. Much of social life, Sartre argues, is a complex negotiation between the desire to be seen and recognized, and the desire to resist being fixed by what others see. Relationships, public performance, political identity, professional reputation, all of these are arenas in which this negotiation takes place constantly.
So bad faith is not only a private failure, it is also socially structured.
Yes, and Sartre's political thought extended this analysis to social structures themselves. In his later work, particularly The Critique of Dialectical Reason, he attempted to integrate existentialism with a Marxist analysis of class and history. The individual's freedom, he argued, is always exercised within material conditions that constrain what choices are actually available. Genuine freedom requires not only individual authenticity but social transformation. His political engagements were often controversial. His relationship with Soviet communism was long troubled, and in retrospect marked by a willingness to ignore evidence of atrocities that is difficult to defend. He eventually broke with the French Communist Party after the Soviet invasion of Hungary in 1956. But the delay damaged his reputation among those who had expected more from the philosopher of radical responsibility.
So Sartre's own life presents a case study in the difficulty of living up to one's philosophy.
Yes, and Sartre was aware of this, at least in retrospect. The philosopher who argued most forcefully that evasion is always a choice, and that bad faith is always a form of cowardice, did not himself navigate all the pressures of his historical moment without failure. This does not invalidate the ideas, it confirms them. The point was never that authentic existence is easy. The point was that it is demanded. Sartre's influence on later philosophy extended to feminist thought, particularly through de Beauvoir's The Second Sex, which applied existentialist categories to the analysis of women's condition. Femininity was not a biological essence, but a situation imposed from outside, that women were conditioned to accept as their nature.
So the idea of existence preceding essence became a tool for analyzing social structures that fix people in roles they did not choose.
Exactly. And this application of Sartrean categories to the analysis of gender, race and class became one of the most productive legacies of existentialist thought in the second half of the 20th century. The insight that what appears as nature is often a historically produced condition, and that the naturalization of that condition is itself a political act, became foundational for multiple strands of critical theory. Sartre passed away in Paris in 1980. His funeral was attended by tens of thousands of people who followed his coffin through the streets of the city. He had requested no official ceremony, no religious rites, no institutional commemoration. Even in death, the refusal of fixed form held.
So what remains of Sartre now, beyond the historical record?
What remains is the challenge. Not the system, not the political positions, not the personal choices, but the core demand that you look honestly at your life and ask whether you are living it or whether you are hiding inside it. Whether the choices you are making are yours, or whether you have outsourced them to convention, to expectation, to the accumulated weight of what you have always done. You are not what happens to you. You are what you choose to become, and avoiding responsibility for that does not eliminate the freedom. It only hides it, badly, in the one place it can never be fully concealed, in the choices you are already making.
Thank you for staying with us tonight. And thank you, Rowan, for guiding us through Sartre's ideas, his life, and the confrontation with freedom that his philosophy refuses to let anyone avoid.
Sartre did not promise that facing your freedom would make you happy. He promised only that it would make you honest. And that honesty, however uncomfortable, is the only foundation on which a life that is genuinely yours can be built.
If this conversation stayed with you, You are welcome to like, comment, and subscribe. You will find other episodes here where history, ideas, and power are approached slowly. Until next time, stay with us.